Hello everyone, welcome back to my top 100 favorite video games of all time. If you have missed the last parts, make sure you go ahead and check those out before digging into this chapter. Starting with number 30, Dragon Quest XI for the Nintendo Switch. Dragon Quest is an RPG series that I always loved elements of, and I played a bunch of them, and played a lot of the side games. I always really enjoyed it, but it was never one of my absolute favorite franchises. A big exception is this game, 11. I was blown away. It is one of the best modern RPGs ever. And I think like something like Lost Odyssey, a few generations before it, it took the absolute best of what a modern game can do with modern technology without losing sight of what made the classics so iconic and timeless, and was the perfect fusion of all that. It took what could have been envisioned in one of the great Super Nintendo or PS1 era RPGs, but maybe couldn't quite be accomplished due to the technical limitations at the time, and just ran with that vision and made, to me, the perfect Dragon Quest experience. And quickly became one of my favorite games of all time, and I'm really excited to see where they take things with 12, because I loved 11. And then rolling back the clock to an old classic from the Super Nintendo era to number 29, another Squaresoft classic, we have Final Fantasy VI, which to me is the absolute pinnacle of the pre-Final Fantasy VII era of Final Fantasy. To create one of the ultimate timeless classics, this along with Chrono Trigger, I think are the real pinnacles of that era. I think they are the greatest games from the entire Super Nintendo / Sega Genesis era of gaming. And what edges this out over games like Final Fantasy IV and V for me is that I feel like it was even stronger, as strong as 4 was, especially from the storytelling perspective. I feel like it was by far the strongest of that era, with the way that it told its story, how expansive its story was, even though the structure of the story was maybe a little tighter in Chrono Trigger. The actual full narrative, I think, was not quite up to the level of Final Fantasy VI, which I think was just majestic and really brought these characters to life. Number 28, The Legend of Dragoon for the PS1. A game I am still shocked as a first-party Sony IP that has not been brought to the PS5 or PS4 even before that as a remaster. Obviously a remake would be an incredible undertaking, but I don't get it. And it was hugely popular. It has a massive fan base and a very loyal fan base, and I'm part of that fan base because to me this is one of the greats of the PS1. I know some people, it's not quite to that level for them, but for me, I loved it. I thought it was some of the most fun I had with a PS1 era RPG. I thought it was great. The combat was a mix of stuff that felt very familiar, and then the time button presses just added something a little different to the flavor. And I thought it was something that took what could have been a very just generic, tried and true by the numbers RPG, and it kept adding these elements that just felt unique enough to it to make it not quite feel that. And I really thought it was a brilliant game. I was blown away by it when it first came out, and it'll always hold a special place in my heart too, because I had a best friend in elementary school who then moved across the country when we went to middle school, and I got to go over one time during the summer and spend a few weeks out there with them and hang out, and it happened to be like right after my birthday, and so they got me a birthday gift while I was there, and it was the PS1 copy of The Legend of Dragoon. And so that will always kind of hold a special place in my heart too, because of that memory attached to the game as well. Number 27, another RPG from that era that I never heard anyone talk about, but will always be one of my favorites, The Legend of Legaia for the PS1. Legaia 2 Dual Saga was okay on the PS2, and a different company made it, but this game I feel like is just, it's such, I hate the term hidden gem, but that is exactly what this is. It was not a big hit when it came out. It's something that seems to be just kind of forgotten to time, but to me it was fantastic. I think it might be one of the most fun, if not the most fun, turn-based RPG combat system ever devised. I thought it was brilliant, it was fantastic, and everything about it, to me, felt it was very charming in its time, and will always be one of my absolute favorites to go back to. Number 26, the Dreamcast and GameCube classic RPG that is continuously one of the most requested remasters ever. I don't know what Sega is doing. Skies of Arcadia. An absolute legend of a game, and it is remarkable. It has one of the most charming experiences in this genre. It is one of the best examples of exploring one of the fan favorite elements of classic RPGs with the airship, and making it this world where you are largely exploring it through that, and the different elements that are included in the treasure hunting. It's so much fun. It is one of the best RPGs ever made. It genuinely is. And it is one of the most head-scratching situations that it has not been re-released. It is so heavily requested and is held in such high regard that I can't believe it's not been given another shot on modern platforms, because its fan base is well earned. Number 25, breaking into the top quarter of my favorite games ever. I have hundreds of games. Number 25 is Shenmue 3 on the PS4. Will we ever get Shenmue 4? I really don't think so, but I wish we would, because I adore Shenmue 3. After spending so many years hoping to get Shenmue 3, and then that shocking announcement, going through the whole Kickstarter process, and I was heavily involved in all that because it was just madness. And there's one thing that Shenmue 3 will never quite be equaled in, is that element of the experience of feeling so involved and waiting so long and feeling like you are a part of the experience of this game actually coming to fruition. And it was such an emotional experience to go through. And I loved it. I talked about this with some other people that are the same boat, where like, I don't get people that are fans of the first two that didn't like Shenmue 3. I really don't get it, because it's almost exactly what I imagined Shenmue 3 to be. Not quite there, but pretty darn close. And it really feels like a Dreamcast game, just with again, like a modern visual flair to it. It feels like a game from that era. It feels like Shenmue 1 and 2, and then we got Shenmue 3. Finally. I thought it was brilliant. I loved that game. I do wish it took the story farther, but he just kind of, I don't know, narratively paced things in a way that felt like Shenmue 4 would be a guarantee, and we would get a Shenmue 4, and who knows, 5, or whatever to finish the story. So it is a little disappointing in that regard that didn't take it further, but the actual experience really just felt like the next chapter of the Shenmue saga that we were waiting so long to play. It was incredible, and that's something that will never be, I think, quite equal, because I can't imagine another situation where being involved in such a passionate fandom and the Kickstarter process and whatever for something that was held in limbo for so long, not something just like an original or a return of a classic reimagining of an IP or whatever, really just the next chapter in a story that was never finished. It's so iconic. And number 24 is Shenmue, the original Dreamcast version, a game that was so far ahead of its time. It's remarkable looking at other games that came out that same year. Such a unique experience. Those early days of the Dreamcast, early days, there really weren't that many days of the Dreamcast, but the Dreamcast is such a unique experience, and when it came out, it's one of those, you had to be there around the time to really appreciate how insane the leap felt like with the Dreamcast at the time, coming out before the PS2 and the Xbox and the GameCube, and looking at games on the N64 and PS1, and then comparing it to like games like Shenmue when they came out. It was crazy. And then beating that out is number 23, Shenmue 2 for the Sega Dreamcast, one of the all-time classics. As much as I love 1, 2 took everything that I liked about 1 and expanded upon it exponentially. It's a huge game. It's incredible. I was blown away by. I kept thinking like, oh, this has to be. They're not going to go to Kowloon because it's already a huge game in itself, and they were going there, and they were going further, and I couldn't imagine, at the time, with how incredible the experience was, and how it looked, and how it played, and how detailed the world was. I was blown away when I first played it by how much was within this, and I think it is the strongest chapter of that experience. Number 22 and 21 I kind of talk about together. We have number 22, Yakuza Kiwami 2 for the PlayStation 4, and 21 is Yakuza 2 for the PS2. Yakuza 2, just in general, like the concept of it in the original game, I always really liked, and it was something that would have been on this list many years ago when I played it on the PlayStation 2, but I gained an even greater appreciation for it when I went back and finally got back into the franchise, played 1 and 2 again, and then started really with 0, and then the remakes of 1, and just the past few years, I blasted through the entire franchise, and it made me, in revisiting this game I hadn't really played in a long time and ended my experience originally with Yakuza 2, I regained an even greater appreciation for how much I really enjoyed Yakuza 2. I loved the story of the Korean Mafia, and I loved everything that was great about the first game that was then improved in the second game, and I just thought it was such an incredible experience. And why I like the original a little bit more than the remake, even though the remake, aside from obviously being modernized control-wise and looking exceptional, it's incredible how great that game looks, and the things that were added to it, there's also some changes that were made in some scenes and some music changes, and a few things that were actually taken away from the original version that makes the original PS2 version just very slightly edge out the remake, even though there's obviously some things that are significantly better in the remake. Just the overall Yakuza 2 experience is right in here. And then beating them out in number 20 is Judgment for the PS4, which I was surprised that I would liked this as much as the mainline series, getting a different perspective on the world of Yakuza, of Like a Dragon, and I liked the investigation elements and having very different characters and a very different style of storytelling, and I thought it was fantastic. I was immediately drawn in to this different way of experiencing this world I had come to love, and I thought things were improved even further and expanded upon and just absolutely perfected with then Lost Judgment for the PS4 number 19. I really hope we get a third Judgment game. I know there's issues with the voice actor and there are other things going on, but I really hope we get another one because these games are amazing. And again, the second one with Lost Judgment, I feel like especially the investigation elements and the kind of like lawyer aspect and stuff were improved, and I just thought they were an incredible experience and some of the best in one of my new favorite franchises. And speaking of favorite franchises, number 18, Star Trek Resurgence, the PS4 or PS5 version. It's crazy that it is this high, but if you know me at all, I have an entire other channel devoted to Star Trek where I upload constantly because Star Trek has been throughout my entire life my favorite thing ever. Nothing comes close to Star Trek. But Star Trek video games haven't always been the best. Even when they're ones I really enjoy, some of them are some of my favorite games ever, towards the bottom of this list, beating out some amazing classics, even though they're not the greatest, because I just love Star Trek so much. And this game is another one that's not quite perfect. There are some problems with it, but it is the closest we've ever come to my dream Star Trek game. It is so close. It's almost there. And coming out in this era of Star Trek, this is closer to what I thought a modern Star Trek show would be like, and really feels so much like a genuine, true love letter to the spirit of Star Trek, even though it's not quite perfect. I don't care. I really like it so much, as I love Star Trek more than anything. And again, this is the closest we've ever come to my dream Star Trek game. I really hope we get another one that expands upon this and improves upon it, because this immediately just became one of my favorite experiences ever, just because of my love of Star Trek and, tying it into TNG, but not being just a nostalgia bait element, actually making it work within this new story. It was just fantastic, and this is just me being a super Trekkie that makes this game so incredibly high. Number 17, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and Future Redeemed. I cannot wait to see what Monolith Soft is able to do with the next iteration of Switch hardware, given the support they've been given by Nintendo for the Xenoblade series. And even though this era of the Chronicles is kind of coming to a close, I can't wait to see how things go from here, because Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was an amazing experience. Obviously, one of the greatest games I've ever played. It is fantastic. It took everything that games like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 did well, and did it just as good, if not better, and took everything that didn't quite work and added its own elements to the mix to create a remarkable experience. And then tacking on Future Redeemed and really being a love letter to the franchise as a whole, with hints to Gears and Saga, and also being the perfect way of kind of wrapping up this era. It really was this remarkable experience, and showed how this series has become and grown to be the level of some of the RPG greats, and really should be appreciated in that vein as much as stuff like Final Fantasy. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is just an unbelievable experience that really shows how much has been learned and built upon through these games, resulting in one of the greatest games I've ever played. Number 16 is Final Fantasy X, and the PS2 version overall, because there are some weird visual issues with the remasters of it that I actually overall prefer that experience, and that was, of course, how I originally played it. It was such an amazing experience. And this is one that I've always loved, but I like it actually a little bit more as time goes on, because as time has moved on, it's lost that new, modern, top-of-the-line technical achievement feel, and has become more of a classic. As eventually, Final Fantasy VI was like, oh my gosh, can't believe what they are doing that, and Chrono Trigger, like, how is this running on a Super Nintendo? And then we first saw Final Fantasy VII, and there's always that, and then time passes, and some of them eventually just become this timeless classic, and 10 really has captured that feeling for me over time. And it's probably the Final Fantasy that I've replayed second most behind 7, and maybe as many times as 7, because I think it has some of the best replay value, and it has really, again, I think over time become just one of those timeless classic video games, and genuinely feels like the end to a certain era of Final Fantasy, that string of amazing games. It's crazy how fast Final Fantasy games were coming out, especially once you get to the Super Nintendo through that golden age on the PS1 to Final Fantasy X. I mean, the time frame between Final Fantasy 6 to 10, I can't believe how short it is. How many of these amazing games, and it really feels like kind of an end of that era of Final Fantasy, even though, unlike some people, I do enjoy a lot of the modern Final Fantasy stuff too. It feels like the end of that particular era, and is just a brilliant experience. And beating that out, which I cannot believe, is number 15, until I finally got my hands on it. And this has been an incredible year, 2024, for video games. Number 15, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth for the PlayStation 5. This game was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. I will come out and say that genuinely, while there are some things about it that towards the end that narratively I didn't agree with some of the choices, overall, there's one thing about Infinite Wealth that beats even the games above this. It is the most fun, just unabashed enjoyability that I've ever had with a video game. Even more than games that I like more than it in that aspect of the experience. There's so many, there's the exploration element, there's a story element, there's how much did something emotionally connect with you, how much you like the characters, there's the music, there's so many different parts of the experience of a video game, but in just the aspect of how much fun did I have, this is the most fun I've ever had with a video game. Infinite Wealth. It is remarkable. And still a great story. That element is not my absolute favorite in the franchise, but in the, middle to top half. And there's so many great things. It's so expansive. I can't believe how huge this game is. And in a way that doesn't feel big to be big. Every inch of it is there for a reason and feels fun. And it's just a blast. I couldn't believe the... playing... when I came out, I'm like, oh, there's like an Animal Crossing game in here. I don't even know, 20 hours into playing that? It's crazy what was in this game, and I want to pick it up, talking about it, and start playing it again, because it is just so much fun. It is a game that I will just pop in and re-explore Hawaii and play the mini games, and it's the most fun I've ever had with a video game. It was the perfect way to experience, one of the earliest games of 2024, and just shows how strong this series still is. As it's changed over the years, just the quality has never dipped off. Even some of the major changes to the style of storytelling or gameplay or whatever, it's just been something different, and it's still just this remarkable series. Moving on to number 14, one that's not always a fan favorite, but for me, I really connected with elements of it. Yakuza 6 for PS4, Song of Life. I really connected with the Kiryu and Haruto relationship and the dynamic that added to his character. There's something about that really clicked with me, and I was very involved. And then Onomichi feels like a place I would want to live, and has the greatest sort of Shenmue feeling, especially Shenmue 1 vibes of any game in the series. And those elements mixed in with the familiar Yakuza elements from 1 to 5 really created something a little different that I understand why it's not everyone's favorite, but to me it really connected and made it one of the most memorable experiences. And the Yakuza I've gone back and actually played more than the others, because the relationships within it and the setting were my style the most. It's something about it really just connected with me on that emotional level that made the fact that it was also a great, fun game even better. Then beating that out it's going to be hard for the series to ever truly surpass this benchmark. My 13th favorite game of all time, my favorite game so far in the Yakuza / Like a Dragon franchise, Yakuza 0. It's still, I think, probably the most popular game in the franchise, and usually is considered to be the best, and it really deserves to be. In my replay of the series after playing 1 and 2, and I started again with 0, I kept waiting for something to surpass it, and nothing ever quite did. It just feels like the most perfectly balanced of all of them, with all the different parts of what makes a Yakuza game a Yakuza game. The style of gameplay, the exploration, the sense of humor, the sense of drama, all those different pieces are stronger or weaker in each of the Yakuza games compared to others. And this feels like the one that captured every one of those pieces the best. Something like Infinite Wealth was far more fun, and the expansiveness, of course, was exponentially greater, and there are things that are so much beyond what Zero was able to accomplish. But then there are some elements, especially with the storytelling, that, while very good, weren't quite to the level of this. And not even just the story, but how the story is told, and the balancing between having two main protagonists was done very well. Everything about it was so tightly structured and perfectly well placed that I felt like it was just the ultimate example of what this series is, and is yet to be surpassed. Number 12, a game that's always been one of my all-time favorites that I like even more as time moves on, because there's never been anything quite like it. Parasite Eve for the PS1. Even the sequel, which then changed some things to try and emulate games like Resident Evil a bit, there's still been nothing quite like that first Parasite Eve. and I keep waiting for a Parasite Eve, 1 and 2 collection. You can forget Third Birthday on the PSP, but that first one is still so incredibly unique. There's never been anything the same, and that's really sad because it is one of the best video game experiences I've ever had. And anytime I go back to it, I guess 5 to 10 years or whatever, I might go back and play through it again, and I feel like I enjoy it even more each time I go back because it just still feels so fresh and original, just between the style and the way they took that original story and made this video game version of it. It is one of the greatest achievements of that golden age of 90s Squaresoft. The semi-turn-based feels a little bit like Vagrant Story, but a little different with the combat system. It just, everything about it feels so unique, and it's a remarkable experience that I really hope to get that feeling again someday from something that feels like the original Parasite Eve. Then the final one for this volume, before we get into my top 10, number 11. A bit of a, I guess, black sheep from the golden age of Final Fantasy. Some people love it, some people hate it. Final Fantasy VIII for the PS1. It is something very different and does feel a bit odd when going back in comparison to 7 and then 9 being very traditional, and it feels like, again, it is that black sheep game, but I love it. And I think a lot of it has to do with how I experienced it. I'm really happy to have grown up as far as video games at the time that I did, being that I was still young, but old enough to understand and appreciate the storytelling and stuff with that golden age of Square in the 90s. Really, there's never been a run from a company quite like that. Modern days, Monolith Soft is getting close, but never quite like that. The number of games that they came out with on the PS1, it's insane, and the consistency and quality, games that didn't make this list that were incredible, like Threads of Fate and Front Mission 3 and Air Guys, Brave Fencer Musashi, so many amazing games, and being a part of that experience, and something like Final Fantasy VII being a part of that moment, and then Final Fantasy VIII coming out, and I remember getting the demo disc from Pizza Hut. Of all places, you used to be able to get PlayStation games from ordering pizza. And on that demo disc, and having some levels of Crash Team Racing and stuff was cool, and that Final Fantasy VIII demo was mind-blowing, and I could not wait. And then the game came out, and it wasn't anywhere near my birthday, and I wasn't going to get it for Christmas, and I didn't have enough money really to buy it, but I was allowed to rent a video game or a movie every week from D&J Video, and so I would rent it, but I could only really play for a bit over the weekends, and at the time I was playing soccer and stuff, and I had school, so I'd play a little bit and save, and then I'd rent it again and play a little bit more, and then eventually I was 3/4 the way through the game and was able to buy the copy of the game. But it was such a unique experience, it's always stuck with me, that I really, really enjoy Final Fantasy VIII, despite its oddities and things that, maybe some things, elements of it don't quite work, but I still think it's a remarkable game, and is very unique, and took a lot of chances, which I think games don't take anymore, especially with a direct sequel to an incredible best hit, seller. You don't take chances with the sequel usually like they did, even though sequels in next entry in the franchise, obviously not a direct sequel to Final Fantasy VII, but it's the name recognition, and it really feels emblematic of that era where games, even in a hugely recognizable franchise with consistent releases, would still take big changes in between games. And in a weird way, I'm almost sad to see it leave the top 10. And that's it for this video. Next time we'll be getting into the top 10.